Hello, everyone. My name is Alaina G. Levine. I'm president of Quantum Success Solutions and author of the book Networking for Nerds. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be here today with two friends, amazing colleagues, amazing leadership gurus, these women that we're going to be talking with today about leadership, leadership in our careers, leadership in our projects, leadership in our lives. These two leaders are truly experts in their domain, and I'm so thrilled that they have the time and the interest in working with you to share with you their thoughts about leadership. We're going to go and talk about all sorts of different aspects of leadership and how you can be thinking about leadership, especially in the middle of this crisis. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it on YouTube and in other social media platforms. And if you have questions, we will be taking your questions at the end. So please write your questions down in the webinar dashboard that you have in front of you. So here, what are we talking about? We're talking about leadership in a dynamic landscape, navigating your career and team in the age of COVID-19. You know, when I started talking with my team here today about doing a workshop like this, doing a webinar, particularly for the STEM community, but honestly for everyone, we're not even that far into the COVID crisis. We were in quarantine, but we weren't where we are today in the beginning of June, and things have changed. It truly is a dynamic, changing landscape, often changing minute to minute. When you have a situation like what we have right now, we absolutely have to rely on strong leadership. So I couldn't think of another topic better for our conversation today than the topic of leadership. I want to introduce you to my team, my colleagues, Christine Cutucache. Dr. Cutucache, she is the Haddix Community Chair of Science and the Director of the STEM Trail Center, which is a STEM education center. She's also Associate Professor of Biology at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. She's also an entrepreneur. She's a partner in SciLead. Welcome, Christine. So glad you could be here.
Thanks, Alaina.
I am so excited to be here to hear what you have to say about servant leadership and leadership without authority. I know you've been thinking about these things for a long time. What are you most excited about when it comes to sharing information about leadership with emerging leaders or established leaders? What's one thing that you are so excited about sharing?
I think the biggest thing for me is that leadership is not what we often think about in terms of a definition of leadership. I think a lot of folks think, well, I have to be told I'm a leader in order to be a leader, but as we'll focus so much on today, that's really not the case.
That's amazing to me. It's just so interesting because we often erroneously think of quote unquote leadership as that we have to be assigned a managerial role, or that we're leading a project, or that we're leading a literal team. But that's not the case, right, Christine?
Mm-hmm. Yep, at least in how I see it. And I know we have lots more to share on that today.
Yes, yep. Thank you. So welcome, Christine. Sarah Andrus, I'd like to welcome you. Sarah is the publisher of Science and Medicine journals at Oxford University Press. She also serves on the Career Development Committee for the Society for Scholarly Publishing. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
And Sarah, when you think about leadership, what is like one specific concept that you are excited to share with the audience today? We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people coming in, watching our webinar today from all over the world, not just this planet, but other exoplanets in the galaxy. What do you want to share with them?
Oh my, well, it's so inspiring, especially to work with you ladies, because we represent the STEM field, but different segments of it. And so, Christine is in academia, and you, Alaina, are, in academia and also entrepreneurship and writing. I represent scholarly publishing. And so what's interesting to me about leadership in this current climate, not just invoking the pandemic, but also just the changing climate of scholarly publishing in general, is to really help lead everyone in my circle. And I'll talk about that circle a little bit later, through these changing times and through the uncertainty in the industry, and looking toward exciting things to come and the challenges to come. So that's what I'm most interested in today, Alaina.
I am so energized for both Christine and Sarah's contributions. Sarah, I'm excited to be part of your circle of life. It's going to be fabulous what we're going to talk about. You know, in terms of us, the circle, I just want to share with the audience how the three of us, I'm in Tucson, Arizona, Christine is in Omaha, Nebraska, Sarah's in New York City. How did the three of us come together in our own circle? And it's a really wonderful story. Sarah and I have been working together for many years. She actually was helpful in helpful is understating it. Sarah was the instrumental person, the instrumental leader, if you will, that led me being able to publish my first book with Wiley, Networking for Nerds. Christine has been working with Sarah for many years. The three of us came together under a project a few years ago that was led by Sarah and her colleagues at Oxford University Press. We designed online courses for students who are engaged in research. And then thanks to Sarah, I got introduced to Christine. We started collaborating. And, you know, ladies, would you agree, part of what a leader does is identify opportunities for collaboration, even if you're not the quote unquote manager or leader on that opportunity. Do you think so?
Absolutely. Creativity is what it comes down to, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's why I just wanted the audience, I wanted all of you to know where we're coming from. So we are, as Sarah mentioned, we are really excited about teaching, mentoring, educating professionals in all fields about how they can really improve and hone and harness the power of their leadership capabilities, of your leadership capabilities. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So our leadership objectives for today's webinar is, first of all, we want to help you understand how to apply the concept of 360-degree and servant leadership, two actual concepts, to your current role. And I'm not going to tell what those are. The ladies are going to mention that. We are also going to help you identify opportunities to anticipate the needs of others and proactively support your professional circle. That's an important aspect of being a leader. And we're going to determine how we can parlay our existing training and strengths, particularly in STEM disciplines, but frankly, you could do this with any background, and apply those to leadership strategies for success. So this is what we're thinking about as we plan out this webinar today. So in the first part of the webinar, I would like to ask Christine Cutucache. Christine, could you talk to us a little bit about your vision of leadership and how you see leaders moving forward?
You bet, Alaina. Thanks for such a great introduction. It's so great to be a part of this group today. So as you can see in front of you, this is just a brief word cloud that I put together just to remind us of the many, many hats that our leaders wear. They have so many responsibilities at any given time. They have so many pulls on their attention. They have so many strains on their time. Some of the things that our leaders work on, they want to be working on, and other things are maybe not in their wheelhouse, but they still do it with a smile on their face and head forward. And so I think those are some of the things that really encompass a leader. So you can see some of the items here. You know, worker bee is right in the center. And I think that's what an effective leader is, someone who is modeling effective behavior by making sure they get their own stuff done. A planner, of course. How can anyone lead without having a plan? No one will know how to follow them if they don't have a plan in place. They have to be a builder. They have to build some sustainability, some infrastructure. Otherwise, all of their initiatives will just kind of come crashing down. It might be a day later, a month later, a year later, but that's really important. Similarly, they have to be strategists to think about, as you were both saying at the intro, having the effective network. Other folks will call this a board of directors, to make sure that they have the right folks on the bus and in the right order on the bus, to make sure that everybody's contributing to their own best strength. And I think one of the unique attributes that we've all seen in really effective leaders is that they're able to see what each person on the bus brings to the table, right? So they know who should be in role A, role B, role C. They know how everybody's going to work and interact with one another. And that takes special talent, and it can be obviously, you know, generated over time. Leaders aren't born. They certainly work at it. Every leader that I know, they didn't say, yeah, when I was 4 years old, I was a leader, clearly, and that's just what I've done. The most effective leaders that I've had the privilege of working with have really led sort of out of reticence. They've been forced into it and been like, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if I want to go down that road. But they've been the most effective leaders because, as we'll talk about next, they are really focused on being a servant leader, serving others first. And that's the critical take-home message today, is the more that we can prioritize the interests of others, the priorities of others, the goals of others, the more effective that we can be as leaders. Oh, looks like we skipped a slide. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Click again, Alaina, would you please?
Oh,
thanks. So this is how I think of leadership. You know, I think I've read every single leadership book that has been published to date. Sarah and I have kind of gone back and forth on that just to make sure we're really comprehensive. And you'll see that everyone has a slightly different philosophy. You know, it ranges from typical leadership in the military through leadership within a traditional academic structure. You get every bit of leadership. I'm sure that everyone on the line today has experienced managers or bosses that they enjoy being around, and others that they've kind of thought, maybe I don't jive with this person so perfectly, right? And so I sort of think of leadership on this sine wave continuum. So instead of thinking about a company or corporation on this sine wave, as others have published, I think about it this way. When folks try to be a leader, so instead of kind of being forced into a leadership spot, these would be the folks saying, I want to be a leader now, and sort of at the peril of everyone in their path. Often what we see first is sort of this authoritative top-down approach. You know, I'm sure that you've experienced folks like this in your lives, someone who's kind of sitting at their desk barking orders to others. It might be literally yelling orders to others. It might just be kind of firing off emails. You will do this, you should do this. That's what I mean by authoritative top-down type of leaders. Often these folks will get sort of some feedback that they take to heart, and then as human beings, I fall into this exact same category frequently. When we course correct, we do it by a total turnaround, right? Okay, I'm not doing this effectively. I must do the total opposite to be more effective. But instead, we really want sort of the sweet spot, right? So the opposite, as I would see for a top-down kind of leader, is more like an overly sympathetic leader who's dismissive, right? So you may have come across these folks previously as well. So someone who's kind of said, okay, how's everything going? Okay, let's spend all of our time talking about, you know, the great things going on. Don't worry about getting your stuff done, right? There's no true accountability, and it's dismissive of the individual's work because the boss is like, that's fine. No need to hold you accountable, right? So it's actually a sign of disrespect for both parties to sort of enable this kind of behavior, at least in my experience and in my reading. So that's what I'm really speaking from today. So this is sort of this pendulum of, okay, authoritative top-down, okay, remove all the sticks or the ways that we can enforce certain behavior. And then we go back on the pendulum up with too many sticks. So again, another 180 course correction. Okay, I'm being too nice, you know, I better be really forceful. And then I think the progress there really moves to alienation. And so, you know, folks are a little bit more comfortable with sort of the top-down leadership, but once it becomes so many sticks and just that swinging of the pendulum, I think alienation really comes into play. And that's not good for anyone, again, right? So the next bit is everyone will have left by now. So it's unfortunate, but you know, a lot of the literature really indicates that this is the truth, right? So as humans, we want to support others. We really want to help folks within our network. We want to make sure that we're doing our jobs really effectively, that we're working with our groups really effectively. But sometimes we have to be really self-reflective and think about the ways we can improve. And so then we go back up another turn, and new crop, new folks coming in. And so this is the opportunity now for leaders to embrace. Alaina, will you click one more time?
Yeah.
Thanks. 360-degree leadership and servant leadership is what we're focusing on. And so I mentioned that servant leadership is really just thinking about others first. And it's shown kind of in the middle here because hopefully, ideally, it's somewhere between, of course, being very genuinely compassionate and supportive of a team and making sure that there's progress. And ultimately, at the end of the day, always putting others' priorities first. And so that's what we mean on servant leadership.
You know, Christine, as you were talking in terms of the pendulum swinging back and forth, I wanted to ask you both this, Sarah and Christine. If you are presented with a leader who has that authoritative and top-down nature, how do you work with this person? How do you as a team member or as another leader in the system in which you're operating, how do you work with this person? What do you guys think?
Yeah, for me, I think that what I've read and just through personal experience really seemed to be effective is make sure that when we're reporting to these types of leaders that we're doing our best work. We want to make sure that this leader shines and that we don't get in their way so that they feel like they're supported, and hopefully they can start to realize that they can rely on the folks in their team, they can deliver that way, and hopefully kind of bring them closer to the 360 and servant leadership is how I view it.
I love that idea of helping the leader shine. You're shining by helping the leader shine. You're doing your best work. That helps the leader. Of course, that helps them do better, which helps you enables your success too. So it's sort of like a circle.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Sarah, what are your thoughts about working with a leader who is more on the authoritative and top-down side of the spectrum?
I would agree with Christine on the approach that that type of leader would appreciate, although I would even go so far as to argue that a leader or manager, if you like, who is excessively authoritative and top-down, and also the other opposite end of that spectrum, I don't think that's good leadership on either end of that spectrum. So, you know, we say that's a leader, someone who is authoritative, who is, you know, giving orders. You know, for me, that's challenging because I don't consider that to be good leadership if they are not making concessions towards helping their circle, which I'll elaborate on in a minute, to develop. But yes, I think Christine is correct that if you are in a position where your direct manager is interested in only, you know, being very authoritative, that doing everything that you can to help them succeed is probably your best approach there.
And ladies, with that would include, I would think that would include always crystal clear communications. So as a member of the team talking to you as the leader of this enterprise, to make sure that I understand what your priorities are. What are your long-term and short-term goals? If we're in a crisis, understanding where you as the leader want to move quickly. Do you agree about the idea of the free flow of crystal clear communications going back and forth?
Absolutely.
I think it's something we're going to talk more about. Okay, I have another question, ladies. What if we're presented with a leader who emphasizes feelings over accountability? How do you work with somebody like this? I think we've all had this type of scenario, particularly in science. I mean, in science, we've had leaders who are authoritative and top-down, particularly principal investigators in labs. We might find that, department heads and so forth in academia, but we also might find people who aren't really invested in their leadership in the sense that they are really holding their feelings of the situation, of the people that they're working with, of the project that they're leading. The feelings about that are held higher than the accountability to the team and to the project. How do you work with somebody like that? Christine, what are your thoughts?
You know, these questions are so hard, Alaina. There's obviously no right answer on these, right? It's a struggle, certainly. And, you know, a lot of folks are conflict averse, and they should be, right? I mean, it's ideal as human beings to be easy to get along with and friendly and helpful and supportive. And you can, certainly. I mean, we've all had leaders that are very supportive, but, you know, kind of fallen into this camp of, oh, great, I can get away with X, Y, or Z because they're not going to hold me accountable. And so I think this is where a team really comes in. So if the team can bring sort of accountability more into the mainstream, so, at the team meetings, person A says, hey, how are things going on X project? Hey, any issues that that will hold up project Y that we should know about as a team? Are there any foreseeable issues that we can help out with to make sure that we meet our deadlines? It's approaching it in a, hey, we're going to hold folks accountable, but we're going to make it a team-based accountability, and it's going to be a very friendly, welcoming way to do it. It's not going to be, names on a spreadsheet or a board of, well, Joe didn't get his stuff done, right? So just making the team more comfortable with just basic accountability for one another. That would be my 2 cents.
I'm so glad you said that, Christine. I'm like jumping up for joy, because this is exactly what we have been talking about. The three of us have been talking about in terms of leadership without authority. Here is a team member or team members who are stepping up to enable the success of the leader, enable the success of the team. And that itself is leadership. Is that correct? Am I understanding it right?
Well, we really fall in the camp of anyone can be a leader, right? Without being assigned a leadership spot or not. So yes, absolutely.
I love it. Sarah, what are your thoughts on this? Emphasizing feelings over accountability. How do you work with a leader like this and be successful?
Right. So what I would add to that is, certainly most normal people don't enjoy conflict. They don't enjoy, being punitive. So when I think about a leader who maybe emphasizes good feelings or is afraid to hold people accountable, that is challenging. And I can relate to that because, earlier in my career, I certainly would have been very hesitant to call somebody out, I suppose, for not performing. The point I'm going to make when I speak more to it is that leadership is so much about empathy, but empathy shouldn't be conflated with letting everyone walk all over you. Empathy is essential to good leadership and understanding the needs of others. But that is, to me, distinct from, saying, there's no accountability or there's no reason to step up if there's a deficit in performance. So I'll speak a little bit more to that. But yeah, it is, as Christine said, a very tricky question because there's no objective correct answer to that.
But Sarah, I'm really glad you said that about the issue of being empathetic, but not letting people walk all over you, that they don't have to butt heads. There doesn't have to be a conflict there, in the sense that you can be empathetic, but you can still be a strong, effective, powerful leader in your projects, in your system, in the work that you're doing. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say more about being empathetic as a leader, which is something we all need to be thinking about anyway. But honestly, in the middle of crises, this is the time especially that we want to think about it. Christine, you had some more thoughts. I want to hear more about what you're talking about.
Yeah, we've sort of danced around this idea of leadership. A lot of the books that are published related to this area and a lot of the leadership consultants really focus on the need to be appointed as a leader, and then the leader has the opportunity to develop the infrastructure, the team, the processes. But what we're really arguing today is that you don't have to be appointed as a leader to be an effective leader. And there have been so many times in my life where I have specifically, told myself, I do not want to be in charge of blah, 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 right? Or specifically thought that I was simply working on a team to support X, Y, or Z, but then found myself kind of leading it just because of sort of taking the worker bee servant approach of, well, how can I help? Okay, all right, well, let's just make sure we're getting stuff across the finish line. We can certainly work together as a group. And then it's so funny because sometimes folks will be like, oh, well, the leader, and it's like, what? Didn't sign up for that, right? And so I really just want to drive home the message that especially STEM professionals, as you alluded, really have a diverse set of opportunities to push them into leadership positions. You know, in academia, we work on lots of things like research projects, and each research project has a different area. Each research project can also be further broken up into different grants. And so there are lots of moving parts, and there are lots of different teams that support different types of activities. And so people might find themselves in a leadership position without being asked to be a leader or being appointed a leader, so to speak. And so that's really what we're driving home here, right? You don't have to be, you know, leader in your title. Lead of X, Y, or Z does not need to be a title for someone to be a really effective leader. And there's this wonderful video on YouTube, so I hope you'll all look at it later. It's of the first follower dancing guy. And I've shown this with my students before. They get a kick out of it. And so this is the idea of sine wave with a follower, right? So how can we move the needle on anything forward? Can we do it by ourselves? No, I cannot think of a single example where, you know, I by myself have moved something from start to end. And I don't know of many examples of major advances happening in the world that are as a result of one person. And so what you'll see in this video is one guy dancing around, and then another guy joins in, and then tens of people come and follow him. And then soon you have 100 people following the first individual. But it wasn't until that first follower got up and said, you know, this looks like fun. I'm going to do that too. And so being a follower is really an influential and an impactful contribution. And of course, remember that the bona fide leader, you know, whoever has that title, boss, manager, whomever, that person is always going out on a limb by sharing ideas or suggestions, and they're nervous to do that. And so you can be a really effective leader by saying, you know, that is a good idea. I'm going to help with that. Or, you know, that idea could be improved by adding something else, right? Being really candid with that leader. That's what folks want. Folks always want some really helpful feedback. So just a fun way to illustrate the impact of a first follower, or not a bona fide leader, so to speak. All right. So to finish up some of my thoughts here related to leadership and sort of being ushered into being a leader, maybe without picking it, or someone choosing you to do that, something that I hear really frequently is folks saying that they want to be a leader. Oh, I wish I had a leadership opportunity. And I'm like, ooh, do you? Because I think sometimes we look at our leaders and think, wow, what a glorified position. That looks so nice. It must be so nice to, right? The grass is always greener kind of concept. Wow, it must be nice to blah, blah, blah. And so the little catchy phrase here today is everybody wants to be a leader until the pandemic hits, right? And so I've never ever heard someone during a crisis situation say, boy, I wish I had that leadership role. Boy, I wish I could be elevated to this, right? And so again, I think it's just a great opportunity to self-reflect and say, how are we supporting our leaders to do their best job, especially in the time of a crisis, right? And it all comes back to this idea of servant leadership. And so servant leadership is not telling people what to do, in contradiction to the sort of top-down authoritative leader that we talked about earlier, but rather it's empowering folks to do their job. It's really incredible what level of creativity and productivity and just passion that folks can bring to any role if given the opportunity and empowered to do so. So that's what servant leadership is all about. So just to tie this all up, again, everybody thinks that being a leader is so glamorous and sort of what we all want to be, what we want to do, until the pandemic hits or until there's some major crisis. You know, our leaders have such challenging jobs, and the best thing we can do is work to support them.
Christine, I want to ask you a question about servant leadership. I was recently talking to a number of people about improving accessibility in science. How can we make science more available, more accessible, more open, and more inclusive for people of different abilities? And I was talking to somebody who had been, she interviewed for a job, and she has a specific physical disability. And she was surprised that in the interview, the decision maker, who would be her boss, did not say anything about the disability, but instead asked her, what tools do you need to be successful? And in that case, what she said was that it shifted the burden of being a member of the team, of finding the resources that would enable her to be successful, not to her, but shifted it to the leader. And when you said that it's empowering them, your team members, to do their job successfully, better what they can do, I was reminded of that. Am I interpreting that correctly? Is that example an example of servant leadership?
Absolutely. I think that every leader really needs to prioritize making sure that everyone that they work with, their whole network, not just folks on their team or, that they work with on a day-to-day basis, is really thinking about their own personal and professional development and, empowering folks to not only do their job, the job that they're in, but, the next job, the next job, the next job. And it sounds like, especially that interviewer is really thinking about even 5 years down the road, not even that moment in time. And so, gosh, those folks are so hard to come by. And that is such an inspirational story. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely. Making sure folks feel supported in the ways that they need. Yeah, that's all we all want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for interrupting you. It seemed to me when I heard her story and when I heard your story just now, that it is not only the goal of the leader to engage in this type of servant leadership, but I would imagine that it's really the responsibility of a strong leader to engage in this type of servant leadership. Sarah, what do you think about that idea?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the idea of servant leadership, I think dovetails really well with the model of 360 leadership, which I will speak to in just a second. And, servant leadership, it doesn't mean that you put others' feelings and needs before performance or everything else. It means that I think you learn to synthesize the needs of the organization with the needs and, again, the empathetic reactions towards your circle of employees, whether that be your reports or your peers or your manager. So I think that's absolutely essential to navigating toward a good organizational sense, whether you're in a crisis period or kind of a normal period. So I just want to emphasize that, yes, I mean, a good leadership perspective and a good leadership attitude is going to serve you well, regardless of whether you're in a crisis period or not.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Christine. And I just want to emphasize again to the audience and clarify that what we're all trying to emphasize is that this type of leadership is something that you can do today. It doesn't matter if you have that leadership, quote unquote, leadership or managerial boss title. It doesn't matter where you are in your career. You could be a student. You could be a high school student. You could be before school. It doesn't matter where you are in your career, and it also doesn't matter what industry you're in. That's why we brought together our team with 3 different essentially industries or sectors so that you could see this diverse view. You can be this type of leader, you can be an effective leader, and you can move yourself and your team forward and your projects and your priorities forward, even in the middle of a pandemic. Ladies, I have another question for you. Shocker, spoiler alert, Alaina has another question. Ladies, I want to know why and how leadership why and how is leadership relevant no matter where you are in your career? So it's sort of just kind of what I just said, but now I'm asking you, why is it relevant at any point? Sarah, why don't we start with you?
I will, because this is a major theme that I've been driving home and will continue to drive home. There is clearly a very pervasive perception that leadership equals management, and we are going to continue ad nauseum, throughout the remainder of this webinar to disabuse everyone of that idea that it doesn't matter if you manage a whole team, if you manage one person, if you manage nobody. Leadership is an attitude. It is not a role. It is not a job description. Leadership is something that you choose for yourself. So it doesn't matter if you are you know, if you are academic, you know, you might be a student, you might be a graduate student, you might be a senior professor. You know, in business, you could be junior, middle career, senior career. There is literally no barrier on where you can exercise good leadership. Um, so I just don't think there's any why and how. It just is. Leadership is relevant, period, no matter where you are in your career.
Thank you, Sarah. Such a critical point to make. Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
I share exactly Sarah's sentiment. She captured it really effectively.
Awesome. Well, I have another question for you. Oh my goodness, this time it's just inspiring me to not only have these questions for you, but also to magically have them appear on the screen from my head straight to the screen. I don't know how that works, but you know, technology, whatever. Ladies, I have a question for you. This is actually an inspirational question in the sense of what inspired you. I want to ask you if you could share a moment of realization that has helped you to understand what leadership is in this context. And if I may, I want to just share a quick story when I think about this myself. And this goes back to when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Arizona. Go Wildcats, bear down. So as a student, I was in mathematics, and I also spent a lot of time in the physics department, and I was president of the Society of Physics Students, and we hosted a student conference for a number of universities in the Southwest, based in Tucson, but the universities were in Arizona, in New Mexico, and Texas, and they were coming to Tucson, to the U of A, for this conference. And I was the manager. I was the literal manager of this conference, and I had really led my team with a sense of delegation. You're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to be in charge of this, you're going to be in charge of that. And what happened was, about 2 weeks before the conference began, I found out that one of my team members, who was in charge of the food, the beverage, and the facilities where we were going to be having the conference, had done literally nothing, zero, and she had lied about the whole thing. And then when I found out that this happened, she disappeared. And so I was the leader. I had to really jump into this situation, into this mini crisis, if you will, and take control. And since the buck stopped with me, I had to make sure that everything took over, you know, everything was going to be successful. This was a magic moment for me. This was a watershed moment for me in my development, and admittedly my continuous development, because I'm continually learning, especially from Christine and Sarah. This was a watershed moment in my continuous development as a leader, because I realized that me just pointing a finger to somebody and saying, you do this, is not what a leader does. So that was a great moment for me. Christine, what has been a moment where you had a realization about leadership in this context?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is just, I think I mentioned earlier that when I started to realize that whoever had the idea and then would carry that idea across the finish line then became leader, I was like, oh, okay, that's how it goes. That was a big realization for me, because even through much of graduate school, I would journal so many different ideas for research studies because I was so afraid that I would run out of ideas. And I wasn't able to put the two pieces together, that idea means nothing without carrying it out. And that's what really effective leaders do, is the idea could come from wherever, but the leader really helps to carry it across the finish line. So that's been a moment of realization for me.
That's so great. Sarah, what about you? What was the aha moment for you?
There are probably several, but one that comes to mind is, you know, when I was a very junior colleague at Wiley, where I previously worked, and, you know, sort of lamenting maybe the fact that I wasn't in a more senior position, and I had no authority, and, you know, had no formal ability to tell others what to do, just to be very proactive. And what I really discovered was something that I could be very good at and that I really enjoyed, was to just talk to people across the organization and hear what they're passionate about and what their ideas are and what they're working on, across departments who maybe don't even talk to each other on a regular basis, and try to connect those people together. And so, you know, a colleague of mine has referred to it as being being grout, grout between the tiles, that actually holds things together. And that to me has carried through to my career to this day, is wanting to realize that leadership is not top down. It is, it can be flat. It can be connecting people together who may not otherwise have connected, and that can be very powerful.
And as you have done with the three of us, I mean, you are the amazing, sparkly, brilliant grout that brought us together.
I like to think I'm sparkly grout, yeah.
Definitely sparkly. And, I also think that I like that image too of bringing people together and being the person who sort of solidifies those connections and really helps to, like what we've been talking about with leadership, really extract the value out of those connections and help people understand how they can learn from each other and collaborate in very diverse ways. It's just such an interesting concept. And so I'm so glad you brought that up. And Sarah, you're now going to take the microphone metaphorically and literally, and I would like you to spend some time, talk to us a little bit about your views on leadership and what the audience can really understand to move their careers and their projects and their lives forward. Please.
Thanks, Alaina. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk first about, to expand on the concepts that Christine introduced about the 360-degree leadership. And I don't know if this is a formal business term. This is just something that the three of us sort of collectively came across as a model that makes sense to us. So to hammer it home yet again, for maybe the 50th time in this webinar, leadership is not management. Leadership is not authority. It's absolutely not dependent on that. So hopefully that has hit home by now. There are different types of leadership. The most traditional, I suppose, model of leadership might be, you are managing a team, or you are managing an employee who reports to you, and you are officially in charge of that person. But it's so much more than that. There is, of course, mentorship. So someone who does not report to you may not be in your department, may not even be in your same industry, leading somebody through mentorship, helping them to find their way in their career. That is leadership. We all know about the concept of managing up. I think sometimes that concept is misunderstood. It's not about just saying to your boss, hey, what can I do? It's, as I'll say in a subsequent slide, kind of anticipating how you can support what your manager needs and what your organization needs on a larger scale. And then, of course, something that is very close to my role when I manage journal portfolios on behalf of scholarly societies, there's so much relationship management who are external to your organization. And so that's very important to me and something that I have quite a bit of experience with. And then there's collaboration across the organization, or even across other organizations. So these are all different types of leadership, and I don't think any is more important than the other. They are absolutely equal in my perspective. And as you'll see in the next slide, there is no top or bottom here. In a traditional organizational chart, there is a hierarchy, right? There is your manager, then maybe you have a team below you. But that is a managerial hierarchy. When I think of leadership, it is a circle. Everyone is at the center of their own leadership circle. And part of that circle is, of course, maybe your manager or those who report to you. They might be your peers. They might be partners or clients. If you're in academia, they might be your students. Anybody who is a stakeholder in your career. And I don't like to think of it as top down. Nobody is above anybody else here. I know that sounds maybe a little bit warm and fuzzy, because yes, of course, traditional hierarchies do exist and need to be respected. But when you think of leadership, I think it's really crucial to think about your circle. And this is a visual analogy that we've already alluded to and that we'll keep coming back to, is that it's a circle. You're in the center of your own circle, and your peers are the centers of their own circles. And to serve in the context of servant leadership, everybody within your circle is, to me, the epitome of effective leadership. So if you go to the next slide. And so part of that, as again, I've alluded to, is anticipating those needs of everyone in your circle. And so much of it is empathy. So we've couched this webinar in terms of crisis and the current pandemic, because that's so timely right now. But I think one of the points that the three of us agree is that if you are an effective leader, if you adopt the principles of effective, empathetic leadership, you shouldn't need to make any major shift in your approach or style of leadership when there is a crisis. You might adjust your tactics, you might adjust certain actions that you do, but if you are a really good leader, you shouldn't have to panic when there is suddenly an unexpected crisis. And in my role in scholarly publishing, I can certainly attest, and well, certainly in higher ed, in the same boat. You know, things are very uncertain right now. What's the future of higher ed? What's the future of publishing? What's the future of science? We're all in the same boat as far as not knowing what the future scenario will bring. So good leadership is helping to navigate and helping everyone in your leadership circle to navigate those uncertain changes. And that's something that is very close to me right now, that I have to navigate every single day. And exactly, the servant leadership aspect is really important when you're thinking of especially external partners who may be feeling very anxious about the current environment, and being able to impart your expertise to those stakeholders. And then I get to the subject of empathy, and to reiterate what I had said before, is that empathy doesn't mean that you're, you know, the quote unquote nice guy, that you let everything slide. Empathy, to me, period, is just understanding that everyone is facing challenges. You may not even know what those challenges are. They may have personal challenges, they may have professional challenges. You're never going to know what everybody is going through. And so understanding that everybody is worthy of empathy is so important to leadership. In some cases, you might anticipate what those challenges are. For example, if, and I can only give examples from my own industry, but you know, if you're working in journals publishing, you might anticipate that one of your colleagues in production is overworked, that their suppliers are bogged down, that they're not able to operate as quickly as they would have in normal times. Just reaching out and helping them to say, hey, do you need me to step in? Do you need me to bring in extra resources for you? That kind of thing is really important for leadership. And that's not somebody who reports to you. That is someone who might be your peer in a different department. But I think that's so crucial, just to have that thought to reach out to somebody who might be struggling and wouldn't necessarily tell you that they're struggling. The same could be said for your manager. They might not ask for help. You could say, you know, as many people do, let me know if I can help you. But I think as we all know, very often when you say that, you don't really get a response. I think if you can come up with something that you anticipate is a challenge for your manager or for anyone in that circle, that's a lot more powerful than asking them to tell you if they need support. And you might anticipate something that's a problem, and they might say, actually, I've got it handled. But even offering is such a powerful show of leadership. And that, I think, is very powerful, especially in a crisis.
And I love the idea, Sarah, of the connection between being powerful and being empathetic, that the two don't cancel each other out. Again, it's an important part. Thank you for saying that. Ladies, I want to ask you a question, another question. What are some ways that the people who are listening to our webinar today, what are some ways that we can all step up proactively to help people in our circle. And again, Sarah, I love that image of the circle. Sarah, why don't we start with you? What do you think?
Yeah, well, so I gave the example of, maybe asking your manager, what projects are you working on, and what are the main things that are going on in your world right now, and then saying, okay, is that something that I can help with? Is that something that you need more resource for? It also goes towards, if you do have a team that you're managing, if you do have direct reports, checking in with them once a week, and not only asking them about projects that you're actively working on, but asking them what else are they doing? What else are they struggling with? What could they use more resources on? And just thinking about maybe even their personal circumstances. For example, I have a few colleagues who during this pandemic have returned from maternity leave, and that's very challenging. Anytime, especially during this time, having to balance having a small child and also having to continue working more or less at the same capacity or even more than they were before. And so that's where empathy comes in, where I might say, I understand if there are certain things that might take a little bit longer than normal. If something's very urgent, we can prioritize that. But I do think that good leadership toward my peers who are in those situations is saying to them, I understand that routine things, non-urgent things might take a little bit longer, and that's not the end of the world. That we can work with you to say if something is extremely urgent, we can focus on that thing. Everything else, is okay to wait a little bit.
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was finished.
I was just gonna say, I think what we've seen in this pandemic and the subsequent crises that we've experienced is we've seen people honestly step up to demonstrate that type of leadership. We've also seen people not demonstrate that type of leadership. So it's interesting to see the dichotomy there, but during a crisis is the time when you can really demonstrate how empathetic you are to your team and to the people in your circle and help to move things forward. Christine, what's your opinion about ways to step up to be proactive to help people in your circle?
I love what Sarah said about, just asking folks how you can support them, and, even taking it that step further, like she mentioned, kind of anticipating what folks' needs are. A lot of the folks that we work with, we've worked with them enough to kind of anticipate, okay, well, the folks in production will need this, or okay, folks working in this area will need this. And so kind of offering the, hey, how about I work on X, Y, or Z for you? Fully recognize we're all bogged down right now, but would that be helpful? So then you're sort of giving them an opportunity to say, yeah, that'd be really helpful. Or, this person genuinely wants to help me out. What can I give them as a way that they can help me out? And I feel like that is just an easier way to get the conversation started, because it can be hard if you just say, well, what do you need help with? What can I help you with, right? So yeah, I love what you captured there, Sarah.
Thanks, ladies. I would just want to remind the audience that you are welcome to submit questions to us. We'll be able to take those questions at the end. Sarah, you had some other thoughts on this subject. I want to hear what you have to say.
Right. So here's, I guess, my last slide, which is expanding on the idea of that 360-degree picture, which is all going to be burned into your brains now, that you are the middle of a circle. We're all the center of our own circles. And so this is the concept of linchpin leadership. And as Christine alluded to, we've read some leadership books. A lot of them are not very useful. They say kind of all the same things. I did really get a lot out of Seth Godin's book called Linchpin, which is not strictly about leadership, but it is about making yourself indispensable within an organization. And so I do like this quote, which is referencing that producing the interactions between people that organizations and individuals care about, and that concept of emotional labor, to exert emotional labor. Again, it can sound so warm and fuzzy, but I don't think that's the case. I think it is absolutely essential to good business strategy. And, you know, we haven't really brought this up yet, but we are all female leaders. And I kind of reject this sense that to be empathetic or to do emotional labor as part of the work of leadership is strictly a feminine thing. And I don't think that that should be the case, because this is for everybody. And this idea that, you know, for a female leader needing to be extra tough and to suppress empathy, I think is really toxic. So I've got that out, but I'll just say that, and I think maybe the two of you agree with me on that. But yes, emotional labor is empathy. It is working toward bringing people together. And the result of bringing people together in that way to synthesize people's passions, their talents, their ideas, to say, hey, you know, I know somebody else who's interested in this thing too. Let's connect. As Alaina mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, this is how the three of us connected, is that we all had very similar interests, and none of us has ever worked at the same organization. We've met each other through kind of non-traditional channels. So that's very essential. So, and this is going back to the grout idea, right? The leadership aspect of seeking people out who are passionate about something, and they could be within your organization, they could be totally elsewhere, and bringing them together and saying, hey, you guys really jive with this idea. Let's bring you together and see if we can create something great. So that is collaborative leadership. That's the linchpin. The linchpin is in that image, that little pin that holds that wheel together. So again, the circle analogy. It is the sensor that holds all of those gears in place. So if you can insert yourself into that linchpin role, that is leadership, and that is making yourself indispensable to your organization.
Thank you, Sarah. Brilliant, and I love how you clarify these issues. So important. And you know, you both talked about the idea of books. There just isn't a good enough book. Honestly, I want to say good enough. There just isn't a good enough book about this type of leadership, all the different types of leadership that you are talking about. There just doesn't exist something like that on the market today. It's something that is so needed. What you're talking about today with the audience, this is what they need to be thinking about. This is what we all need to be thinking about. And there just isn't a place that sort of takes all these ideas and clarifies how you can actually convert these into actionable tasks, actionable tactics and strategies that you can incorporate into your day-to-day. So I'm excited to see what might come for the future, but it's absolutely a need in the marketplace right now. I want to ask you one last question as we conclude for the day. Actually, two last questions. Thinking of your stakeholders, what attributes of leadership are important to develop to make sure you can adapt? And if you could give, I'm thinking, can we give the audience something very specific that they could do finishing up this webinar? What do you think? Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Thanks. Let me take a second to think, because there's so many answers to this question, and I think some of which have been answered throughout the webinar. But if I were to give a takeaway to our listeners across industries, it's important to have that sense of resilience, of being able to communicate to your stakeholders, again, everyone in your circle, those are your stakeholders, that you understand what the potential challenges are for the future and what is the scenario planning that needs to go into, you know, figuring out where we're going. In STEM, in publishing, you know, these are sectors that are not going away, but they're going to change, certainly, and they might change more quickly than we think, or not. It's very much up in the air. So good leadership is learning as much as you can from individuals, from others, from other experts, and from just something as mundane as reading reports, to understand where things are going and to impart that knowledge to those who need to hear about it. So I think, to me, it's the cycle of learning and teaching. And I guess that, folds into Christine's kind of pedagogical expertise is teaching and learning, right? So in any role in leadership, whether you're in academia or not, you are always teaching and learning. And to me, that cycle is extremely crucial towards my being able to serve as a leader towards my stakeholders.
I'm so glad you solidified that concept of the cycle and the circle of learning and teaching, learning and teaching. That's what every single one of us should be doing, or at least aiming to do as leaders, learning and teaching, learning and teaching. Christine, what are your thoughts? What's one thing that we can offer the audience today about this topic?
Yeah, personal development, just hitting home that same point of work on communication, professionalism, have a warm nature. I think just to close, Robert Greenleaf, the inventor of servant leadership, said the servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. So I think just embodying that in everyday practices is what I would leave as a takeaway.
I think that's wonderful. And what a great way to end this webinar. Ladies, Christine, Sarah, I want to thank you so much for your time and your enthusiasm and for your generosity in imparting this information, this wisdom. You're teaching, you're learning. I learned so much from you today. It was so helpful to me. And I'm ready to think about myself as a stronger leader, a more agile leader because of the ideas and concepts that you communicated today. So Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alaina. No, I appreciate your enthusiasm and your your expertise as always. So it's a pleasure to always collaborate with both of you.
Likewise. And Christine, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to collaborate with you as well.
Thanks. It's been great working with you both. And I hope that our listeners will also check out, Alaina, your Challenge Agent YouTube videos, because that really embodies the empowerment that we focus so much on throughout our call today. So
thank you.
Please check those out. Thanks for including us.
And you're welcome to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. You can easily do a search for our names and you'll find us. Of course, you'll be getting a follow-up email from us so that you'll get that information, and also as to where you can access this webinar, the video in the future. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Sarah. High five, and high five to our amazing audience. You guys are rock stars. I can't wait to see what you decide to do as a servant leader in 360-degree leadership. I can't wait to see what change you make in this world and others within this galaxy and other galaxies too. So we're not going to wish you good luck, but we will say enjoy your amazing ride because you are rock star leaders. Thank you so much.
Thank you.